thank Eric for inviting me here tonight. And I know I'm going to talk about race preferences and affirmative action quite a bit, but I want to back up just a bit, and I want to talk a little bit about how I ended up where I'm at right now. I was a really shy girl in high school and in grade school. Wasn't really involved in politics, and then all of a sudden I had something happen to me, and I didn't want anyone else to go through what had happened to me. I had heard all through high school that the University of Michigan used race in their admissions policy to help some and to discriminate against others. I never thought that that could be the case. I looked at the University of Michigan and I held them up here. They were the leaders. I know I'm at Michigan State right now, but the University of Michigan to me were not only leaders in this state, but in this nation and frankly around the world. And I had learned all of my life, from my parents, from my teachers in church, from everyone around me, that you treat people equally, that you don't judge someone based on their skin color. And so I had thought that all of these rumors about the University of Michigan, well, they just couldn't be true, that they were doing exactly what myself and all of my friends and everyone I knew were being taught just the opposite. And I applied to the University of Michigan, had what I thought was a pretty good application. I had a 3.8 GPA out of high school and a 25 on the ACT. I didn't come from a wealthy family. My dad was a police officer, and my mom started as a secretary. So I was very active in high school. When it was student council vice president, was the National Honor Society, ran blood drives in my high school, put together a senior citizen prom, so on and so forth. So I was active, and that's what I had heard about applying at the University of Michigan, was that you not only needed good grades and good test scores, but they also wanted a well-rounded student, and so being involved within your school and within your community would be a plus when it came to your application. So I did all of this. I applied to the University of Michigan, and in January of 1995, I received a letter placing me on a wait list, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that process at U of M. Basically, they deferred until later in the year to let me know whether I would be accepted or rejected. And at that time, I had known other friends of mine, frankly, that had been accepted to the university. Some of those students happened to be Black and Hispanic. And I also, because I was competitive in high school, I knew where people stood as far as grades and test scores went within my class. So I graduated 12th in my class, and I knew who was above me and who was just below me. And these students, my friends who were accepted to the university, had great grades and great test scores as well, and they were active in school, but they still had a lower GPA than I had. And so I started at that moment when I received this waitlist letter to think back to the rumors that I heard. And these rumors weren't just from students. And I recall parents talking about it at football games, and administrators at my high school talking about it. And I still thought there's no way that these rumors could be true. But when I received this waitlist letter, I thought back to those rumors, and I wondered, could this really be happening? And I put it out of my head for a while, and I thought, it's just going to take a few more months. You'll get your acceptance letter, and you'll be at U of M in the fall of 1995. I'm not that old. So I waited and waited and waited, and then comes this thin envelope in the mail. I'd rushed home from school for weeks at this point. Thin envelope comes, and I think, immediately I've got this pit in my stomach, like, this isn't good. And then being the eternal optimist that I am, I thought, well, maybe it's just the acceptance letter and the rest of the information will come soon after. And so I opened the letter and I read probably the first few lines. My dad was the only one home at the time. My mom was still at work. And it said, "We're sorry, we're not going to be able to offer you acceptance." And that moment was a defining moment in my life. It changed a lot of things, and things that I now would go back and I would say, "Oh, you were silly for thinking this." I mean, when I read that, I questioned what I could do with my life. At the time, I wanted to be a doctor. Specifically, I wanted to go into forensics. But at that moment, I thought, well, if the University of Michigan can't accept me to their undergraduate program, how can I be a doctor? I questioned everything I wanted to do, and I questioned everything that I had done. I lost a lot of confidence in myself at that point. I didn't tell anyone that I hadn't been accepted to the University of Michigan. I just told my friends that I decided to go elsewhere. But I looked at my dad, and I said, "Can we sue them?" And I said that not thinking that anything would ever come of it, not thinking that I would ever be involved in a lawsuit. It was my frustration with the policy that I, at that moment, after a couple months of reflection, really believed was in place. And I had no idea that people could actually sue large universities. And here I was, this 17-year-old kid at the time, and I was frustrated. And a couple of years ago, at that point I have to pick up where I'm at and figure out what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go to school, and try to regain some confidence in myself and in my abilities. So I did pick up. I ended up at U of M Dearborn, great school, got a great education. And in 1997, 2 years later, I read an article in either the Detroit News or the Detroit Free Press about a possible lawsuit against the University of Michigan because of their policies. And as I'm hearing about this article and this possible lawsuit, I knew I wanted to be involved. And I tracked down the reporter to figure out who I needed to get in touch with, ended up talking with someone in a legislative office and said, "I'll do anything I can to help." And at that moment, I thought I'd be stuffing envelopes. I thought I'd be sitting in some office, stuffing envelopes, getting information out to people about these policies. Never, even at that moment, I didn't think that I would become a plaintiff in a historic lawsuit. A couple months went by and I ended up meeting with who became my attorneys, the Center for Individual Rights, and they had asked me to be a lead plaintiff in a case against the University of Michigan. And still at that moment, I would have never imagined that years later I could be sitting in a lecture hall listening to a former Supreme Court justice speaking and hearing my name come up. That it's not something that anyone can ever prepare you for. So I decided to move forward with this lawsuit. And as I was making this decision, I actually made it almost immediately when it became an option. But my parents they sat me down and they said, "Jen, you need to think twice about this. You're going to be graduating from college in a couple years and you're going to need a job. And what's the business community going to think about this? Are you going to be able to get a job?" And I looked at them and I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said, "Who believes that racial discrimination is right today? Who's going to support this policy?" I mean, at that moment, I really thought, here I had been taught, again, all of my life to treat people equally and not to judge people based on what they look like. The University of Michigan is doing this, and I'm willing to do something about it. Who's going to judge me harshly for that? Looking back, I now know. So there was some of that back and forth with my parents, and I said, no, this is something that I have to do. My brother would be applying to college in just a couple years. I had cousins that would be applying to college, and at that time I was coaching a cheerleading team, and I thought, I don't want these girls to go through what I went through. I don't want them to question their confidence and their abilities because